Okay, I think that's the camera. Um, just getting back from a friend's place, and I didn't think I was gonna do a video. But what's been really nice is even when I don't think I'm gonna do it, I just do it. And by doing that over and over again, um, I show myself that there's a way through that resistance. And just like, what was it? The Peter Pressfield, was that his name? The art, the war of art, the war of art, I think that's what it was. That a lot of what artists are, the primary number one enemy is resistance. And yeah, it's been cool to do this every day and notice that there's ways around it. You know, my head will come up with all kinds of reasons where it's just like not a good idea. And usually it's just not a very good reason. I could just go ahead and do it anyway. And it's been helping to take away power away from the perfectionist part of me as well. That says it needs to be a certain way. It doesn't. I can just do it anyway. And the only way I can learn that is by doing it anyway. So, I just watched Paprika, which I think potentially influenced the movie Inception. Super, super trippy, very psychedelic. I'm not even sure really what happened. I just kind of vibed my way through the movie. But it was super cool, and I really enjoyed it. And what it brought out for me was this idea I want to talk about today about the kind of Nietzschean return of the repressed, the vengeance of the id, but this kind of beautiful vengeance of the id that I think is happening societally and within people that are living today, at least a growing number of people. And the way that I want to explain this is that I think we have an inherent nature, but we're also cultural beings. We pass down knowledge to each other and adapt to particular environments, and we can kind of stretch and manipulate our nature to some extent, you know? It's quite a crazy extent. And I think what this looks like can fit on pretty nicely to a sort of Freudian analysis of you have your id, which is your nature, and then you have the superego, which is your societal norms and structure and the way that you should behave. And then you have your ego, which is the interface between those two, your raw animalistic nature and the current moment in history and culture you live in that requires certain behaviors of you to function within that culture. And I think what's happened in the last 200 years is we've almost become like we live in a hyper culture. And I just made that up now. But what I mean is that we've moved so far away from our nature that potentially we live in the only things we have within our experience to orient us are only cultural objects. So, for example, whereas, to try to illustrate this a bit, whereas people might have in the past been pulled and driven by drives of lust and hunger, or even the sacred, which I think is also a very important drive, which we don't often think about as a drive, is now we have culturally kind of enshrined images of something like lust or power, but we don't actually have access to the personal impulse to power and lust. And I think maybe now it's more, this gets complicated very quickly, and I don't have I'm not intelligent enough to riff on this in the moment and land this plane. But the basic idea would be that we're now in a psychological world of images to the point where the actual original spontaneous important expression that had vitality to it is obscured. There's only images of it. And that what this does is it creates a very inflated superego, a psychology which is constantly externally oriented and trying to orient itself from the outside, from what you're supposed to do, from what the culture thinks you're supposed to do. And that becomes a heavier and heavier burden on the id and our nature, which just wants to spontaneously express itself. But I think what this does is it creates a kind of resentment and paranoia and rage as the id grows in confusion and its incapacity to just freely express itself. And in proportion to that, the superego is growing to kind of keep it down and in control. And movies like Paprika are really cool because it seems like an exploration of the id kind of marching forward. There's this image in that movie of a kind of parade or a march. And it's totally surreal and made up of all of these objects and characters which don't really make sense. It's just kind of this stampede of nonsense and drives. And it seems to be moving from a desert into a city. And the way that I understand that, and I think it's very relevant to the times that we live in, that it's this id, which is the feelings, is the drives, which really are felt as sensations in the body, which aren't really felt but still are still moving even if we don't feel them, by the kind of logical, externally oriented superego consciousness. This is very abstract, but that's fine. I just want to talk about these until I'll simplify them over time and make them more concrete. But yeah, this subconscious or unconscious move of these powerful, vital forces and impulses of the psyche gradually, pushing and knocking on the walls that the superego has made. It's gotten really dark. Hold on. There we go. The walls that the superego has constructed. And I think that knocking can really feel threatening to the superego mind, which thinks it wants to be in control and thinks it's in control. And I've lost myself. I got drunk on psychoanalyzing. But generally, I think exploring that and having it be depicted in art is really interesting to me. And I really like the way that this movie kind of moves beyond normal conventions of like cinema, but just normal conventions of like regular experienced everyday life too. It's so dark. So that you're kind of forced to confront the experience of the movie with a different part of your mind because you can't make sense of it. So it just kind of washes over you, and it's all about dreams, which oftentimes are illogical but highly emotionally relevant. They're very intense emotionally, even if we don't necessarily can't explain why, like it wouldn't seem obvious. And I just thought that was very cool. It got me to reflect on why I want to create art and why I think it's so important, because it feels like, again, like the last video I mentioned, this ritual of creating art and engaging with art, of nurturing the id, of that vitality that's in spontaneous, irrational impulses, but that knows how to make order out of the world, but just from a completely different paradigm than the conscious, rational mind does. So I've gone on for 10 minutes. It was enjoyable. It's really nice to see. It's been a week now. I think this would be day 7 or 8. Let me get a little bit of light. It's day 7 or 8. And it's nice to see that I can tell my tongue is loosening up. I'm able to articulate myself a bit more. And yeah, I'm excited to keep doing this and get to the point where, I really flesh these ideas out and present them in a way which hopefully will be very interesting. I'll enjoy doing the research and laying these out, because these are ideas I care about anyway, and they're questions I want answered. So that's that. I think I completely forgot about the lens at some point. That's fine. All right. Goodbye.